starting from Sutra 3 in Book 2. These are known as the Kleshas. The Kleshas are our fundamental obstacles to enlightenment, whereas the obstacles we discussed yesterday are the mental distractions, the obstacles to meditation. But these kleshas are our deep-rooted fundamental obstacles to attaining our peace. And there are 5 kleshas: ignorance, avidya; egoism, ashmita; attachment, raga; hatred or aversion, dvesha; and clinging to bodily life or fear of death, abhinivesha. Ignorance, egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to bodily life are the 5 obstacles. And the order is also significant because of ignorance of our true self. It gives rise to all the others. So in Sutra number 4, it reads, ignorance is the field for the others mentioned after it, whether they be dormant, feeble, intercepted, or sustained. So if you imagine the field, the general underlying field is ignorance. And the others mentioned after it sprout. So because we have a field of ignorance, sprouts egoism, sprouts attachment, sprouts aversion, and fear of death. And now ignorance can happen in many different layers. Ignorance is dormant. When is our ignorance dormant? Well, if you look at the example of a newborn baby, the baby is totally in the present moment. And that child is in a pure state of being. Pure state of being. However, it doesn't mean that the ignorance of this child is not there. It will wake up. I once went to a traditional Vedic baby blessing, a naming ceremony. And it was not one based in Hong Kong. I went to Singapore. And the Vedic priest the way he explained it, it really just impacted me very deeply. The mother was there in front of the altar holding the baby in the arms. And the priest was putting holy water and holy ash and flowers around the baby. And then he said to the baby in English, "We're about to give you a name. Before this moment, you have just been pure being. The moment we call you by your name, it'll create that separation of pure being into egoism. And suddenly you will feel separate by your name and separate by the people in your life. And these names and forms will continue to grow and divide and grow and divide. But never forget who you are, my little one." Oh, wow. That was so powerful and so impactful. And to me, it explains this. In a newborn baby, it is dormant. The second one, feeble. Ignorance is feeble. This is the mind of an advanced yoga practitioner. A feeble or attenuated stage. Such a person is not completely free of all the kleshas, but because of their spiritual practices, They have some knowledge of their true self. They have some wisdom of their true self. They're not totally free, but they can keep everything in check. The third one is intercepted. And this is for more beginner practitioners, right? The obstacles are temporarily pushed down by the constant practices of virtuous qualities such as love, truthfulness, discipline, cheerfulness. But if such a seeker is not careful to cultivate these qualities, even for a few days, the obstacles will immediately come to the surface. And then the fourth type is seen in the case of what Sri Gurudev calls average people, people who are not seekers. They live their lives based on ignorance, so the ignorance is sustained. So moving on, let's go into Sutra 5. What is ignorance? Ignorance is regarding the impermanent as permanent, the impure as pure, the painful as pleasant, and the non-self as the self. What is self and what is non-self? This is the practice of Jnana Yoga. When you are practicing Jnana Yoga, the yoga of self-inquiry, you are constantly asking yourself, who am I? Am I this body? Well, I have a physical body. This physical body is female. We say, I am a woman, but actually, are we? Just because this physical body has the organs of a female? Is that who we are? Woman, I am woman? There must be something more to it. Who am I? I am a yoga teacher. Well, I have a big collection of thoughts in my brain that have to do with yoga and the study of yoga. But is that who I am? Because I have a lot of these collections of thoughts in my mind? No, because there was something inside of me that remained the same before I was a yoga teacher. When I was in corporate, that was still me. Who am I? And you keep this inquiry. You keep this inquiry over and over. I am not the body. I am not the mind. I am not depressed. My thoughts are depressing thoughts that I think them over and over again. But who am I? I am not the body. I am not the mind. Immortal self I am. I'm not the body. I'm not the mind. Immortal self I am. Chidanand, Chidanand, Chidanandaham. Harahalume alamastu satchidanandaham. Truth, knowledge, bliss, absolute. In all conditions, I am truth, knowledge, bliss, absolute. That's why we have mantras like this, to remind us, to remind us, to remind us. You sing the mantra over, you sing the songs in your head over and over and over. You reflect on its meaning, boom, you remember, you remember. I am feeling depressed. This is just a collection of my thoughts, depressing thoughts. Okay, let's unpack it. Okay, I'm attached to this. I didn't get that. I didn't get that. Who am I? Am I my thoughts? No. Can I intercept and control the way I think? Yes. Peace received, ready to move on. And in the beginning, it's not easy to do that. It's not easy to separate from the emotions, but it is 100% possible. And if your ego doesn't get inflated, you own those emotions. Yes, I was feeling very depressed, but I understood that depression to mean this. This is how ignorance works. This specific sutra, ignorance is regarding the impermanent as permanent. We recite this at the end of the integral yoga class. This is our Asato Ma mantra. At the end of the class, after our meditation practice, we close by singing Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from unreal to real. Lead us from darkness to the light. Lead us from the fear of death to knowledge of immortality. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. It's a reminder. We have finished our mat practice. Now let us chant this mantra so we remember to carry this wisdom off the mat and into the world, remembering who we are. This is the system. This is the system of integral yoga. So moving on to Sutra number 6, egoism. Egoism is the identification, as it were, of the power of the Siya, the Purusha, with that of the instrument of seeing, the body and mind. This one seems very heady, so let me break this down a little bit. The crystal bowl video. That is the best illustration of this, right? The power of the seer, the Purusha, is like the crystal inside the bowl. The Chittam is the water. But the ego is identifying with the colors that get dropped in the mind. The happy thoughts, the unhappy thoughts, the comparing and the contrasting, the anger, all these emotions, all these life experiences and how we take them so personally, they color the mind. So when we are identifying, we look at our bowl and whatever color it is. So if you're a happy person, your bowl will be nice and yellow or pink or light orange. If you're an angry person, it's going to be very red. And you identify, you say, I am red, I am red, I am green, I am blue. And we are identifying. So the instrument of seeing is our body and mind. That is our instrument, right? We can only see our world. We can only function and make sense of our world. We need a body and we need a mind to do both. We need a physical body and we need a mind to be able to live life. So we cannot deny the body. We cannot deny the mind. We need to exercise the body. We need to exercise the mind. But when we identify that we are this body and we are this mind, we forget the true self that is actually living inside. Take a moment and consider your eyes. The eyes see, but actually, the eyes are just the instruments of seeing. What is inside of you that can actually see? That's kind of a trippy thought. Go beyond just the eyes. What is it that is actually seeing? That's how you can understand the sutra. In the Upanishads, there's the Mandukya Upanishad. There is a verse that says there are the ego and the self are like two birds that sit on the same branch of the tree. One eats and drinks and reacts to the fruits of life, and the other one just observes. There's a beautiful, I think it's a TED Talk, told by a woman called Jill Bolte Taylor. It's called My Stroke of Insight. She's written a book about it as well. She's a neuroscientist, a neurobiologist who studies minds and studies consciousness in people who have brain injuries. And she had a stroke. And she specifically described the ebbing and flowing of her consciousness while she was having a stroke. Yes, Alice says she has read this book, and she said it was this book that took me on the journey to where I am now. Yes, absolutely correct. It is an incredible book. I highly recommend you read it. Alice, if you still have the book in your collection, can you take a photo of the cover and send it to the WhatsApp group? The name of the book is My Stroke of Insight. She described, in scientific terms, her left brain and her right brain. When the one side was damaged, the other side took over. And it was her logical reasoning mind that went quiet and shut down. And suddenly she could just see life in its essence, the essence of everything. It was so beautiful. And then her mind would come back and she would be like, oh my goodness, I'm having a stroke. I need help. And she was going back and forth between these two frames of mind. I remember watching her talk and I thought to myself, this is it. This is the Mandukya Upanishad verse. The ego and the self sit on the same tree. One is in and out of life and the other one just observes. This is what egoism is. Now we can cultivate that in our brains just by meditation. We strengthen that faculty of our brains through our meditation practice, through our spiritual practice, so that we don't need to have a stroke to understand it. We can learn to create that for ourselves. So this is what egoism is. We're identifying with the bird that's in and out of life. But there's a part of us that is all-knowing and all-seeing. If you look back at your entire life and you really spend about an hour to sit back and reflect on your whole life, so much has changed, yet who you are fundamentally has not. There is something inside of you that will always be the same. I will always be this personality called Hersha. That is, yes, this identity of Hersha is the ego, but beyond that, when my kids were little babies, little kids, I used to ask them, so who were you before you became Indira? Who were you before you became Shahan? And of course, they would just look at me and say stuff, but I had no idea what they would try to say. But kids that young, they know. Who were you before you became Myrna? And who are you going to be when you finish being Myrna? It's a good question to ask, because then it helps reduce that egoism and get more into the heart of being that seer or connecting to the seer. It doesn't mean you stop being yourself in this world. You don't stop, but you're not so attached to the identity of it. I know that Hersha is a character in this life that I am playing. And so I'm going to play my part really well. But when it comes time for this character the curtains to draw and the character to leave the stage, I won't be so attached. Moving on to Sutra 7 in Book 2. Attachment is that which follows identification with pleasurable experiences. Always running after pleasurable experiences. Pleasure, 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 pleasure. Right? Think about it. We are so attached to feeling some form of pleasure. If you look at the brain science behind food addictions or neuroses, it's that dopamine receptors. It's why we keep repeating our experiences. Those dopamine receptors are firing up and we keep wanting those pleasurable experiences. That is what causes attachment. The practice of pratyahara, withdrawing from the senses, helps us separate from that attachment. Which brings us to Sutra 8, aversion. Aversion is the opposite of attachment. Aversion is that which follows identification with painful experiences. Our mind has a tendency to grasp onto negativity. As I mentioned before, you may get 10 glowing evaluations from your students, but the 11th one is full of criticism. That person's in the minority. The criticism is in the minority, but what does your mind do? It fixates on the one criticism. And what do? We try to justify, change ourselves. Do whatever it is to avoid that painful experience. But actually, if you look at our modern working life, we always say, well, what are your weaknesses that you need to work on? Yes, okay, everybody has weaknesses that they can get better at. But why are you only focusing on your weaknesses? Why don't you focus on your strengths and cultivate those strengths? You can't be all things to all people. What are your individual strengths? Nurture it and cultivate it. If you have the capacity to nurture those weaknesses, go for it. Absolutely go for it. Or team up with somebody whose strengths are your weaknesses. And suddenly you understand interdependence of life. No human being is an island. Aversion to painful experiences means rushing to fix problems as well. Always rushing. Oh, I need to hurry up and find a solution. This isn't right. Again, coming back to verse 1 in this section, sit with the pain, sit with the discomfort first, and notice where you are grasping. Notice where you are trying to get it away, get it away. That is the aversion, because you're identifying with the painful experience. Again, what we're trying to do is let go of these identifications, these attachments. So your likes and your dislikes, your wants and your don't wants, they bind you. Wants are the same as desires. Don't wants are also desires, but in a negative. They both bind you. Again, okay, we have a question. Here we go. How does attachment to painful experiences fit in with self-sabotage or self-destructing habits? That's a very good question. Self-sabotage comes from conditioning and belief systems. So while we cannot control the environments with which we were raised, we have the capacity to, as spiritually evolved adults, we have the capacity to reparent ourselves. Self-sabotage or self-limiting beliefs comes from imposing conditions on your happiness. I can only be happy if something works out in this particular way. And we don't become open to new possibilities. If it is like, it's like having blinders on. You want to go this way, you want to go this way, you want to go this way. But actually, that is self-sabotaging, because what you do through spiritual practice, by letting go of the attachment to painful experiences, you consider other options. I'll give you an example of how this works to make it a little bit less confusing. Let's say you've been in a series of relationships that always end up with you getting dumped and the person breaking up with you and breaking your heart. And the pain of those experiences prevents you being like, oh, I don't want to date anymore. And so that's like an aversion to having your heart broken. You don't want to date anymore. Or because you're feeling so lonely, you decide you want to date again, but then you're reluctant to open up your heart because you're averse. Another way of avoiding painful experiences is deflecting, carrying the baggage of a previous experience and a previous negative relationship, bringing it into the new relationship. That is where self-sabotage comes in. You're using your past experience, your past hurt, and making your present moment the same as the past. And therefore, you're going to self-sabotage and repeat the lessons because you haven't stopped to consider, well, what are the lessons I need to learn here? And then when you are in that new relationship and you get triggered, something happens and you feel the trigger. If you intercept your thought patterns by using the formulas of the Yoga Sutras, you say, this is a present moment. And I need to understand this situation for exactly what it is. So I'm going to sit with the discomfort for a moment. And I'm not going to be quick to react. Being quick to react and saying, oh, this is exactly like what happened with my last boyfriend, that's self-sabotage. You're carrying those limited beliefs. Because your belief systems, as you hold on to your beliefs so strongly, that has led you to where you are today. And where you are today, if it is not where you want to be, look at what beliefs are holding you back. Look at what excuses are holding you back. It is those belief systems and those excuses that are self-sabotage. And then you say, well, this is a brand new scenario with a brand new person, with a brand new personality, with a brand new life experience, and we are learning from each other. Let's figure this out. You are not identifying with the painful experience. You are sitting with the pain, realizing that this reaction is his story, and my reaction is obviously my story in relation to his story. There's no need to have aversion to it. I can release my attachments. I can release my identifications and look at it clearly. It doesn't mean you stop having conflicts, but you have a deeper awareness of it. Because isn't that what samadhi is? It's a super conscious state. And as we progress towards samadhi, we're progressing towards it. So our awareness gets enhanced, and our awareness gets enhanced, and our awareness gets enhanced. If you've taken the first lesson in the meditation for beginners as part of the online package, lesson number 1, you'll realize there is no such thing as a bad meditation practice. Why? Because every single time you are enhancing your awareness. Isn't that what a super conscious state is? Super enhanced awareness. And so when you let go of that identification with your own pain, because you've skilled in practicing tapasya, you can understand a person's backstory. Okay, why are you feeling like this? What's going on? And then you unpack it. And then you maybe realize that that person's reaction to you is because of their past story. Did that answer the question? I hope it answered the question. Okay. And then it brings us to the last of the 5 kleshas, clinging to life, fear of death. Clinging to life, so reading out Sutra 9, clinging to life, flowing by its own potency due to past experience, exists even in the wise. If you in your life have ever lost someone, be it through a sever of a relationship or losing somebody to death, whether it is a person or a pet, you will know the pain and the emptiness of that loss. And that stays with you. The reason why it is so painful is because it is the most drastic reminder that nothing on this earth is permanent. And the pain becomes more severe when there is much left unsaid and much left undone. This is why it seems to be more traumatic when you lose somebody who is younger. You say, oh, he left too early. There was still so much more for this person to do. Versus your attitude when somebody leaves and they are 100. There is more acceptance there. Well, this person has led a full life. It doesn't mean you stop grieving. It doesn't mean you don't miss that person, but there's more acceptance of it. But that pang is so painful because it jars you open to realize your impermanence, to realize your vulnerabilities, to realize how precious and fragile life is, to force you to gain perspective on your own life. Meaning, if this relationship was significant and there is anything unresolved, there's a churning of regret. Why? Because there's unfinished business. Now, you can use this clinging to bodily life and you can use this fear of death to your advantage. Yes, it is an obstacle. It is an absolute obstacle. However, use it to your advantage. Make a list of everything that is unfinished in your life. Use this as a meditation or a spiritual practice. Make a list of everything that is unfinished in your life or unresolved in your life. And look at what you have control over and what you don't have control over. And then make choices about it. If you were to die in 1 month, how much of this list can you clear out? And then you become more accepting. Now, I talk about my death all the time. And a lot of people are like, Hersha, why are you so morbid? What is going on with you? Why are you so morbid? Well, I don't mean to be morbid, but I think about it all the time. And actually, I do this as a practice on a daily basis. I make sure that even though I've had a hard day with my husband, with my kids, that they know that I love them deeply and I appreciate them deeply. I say it to them before they leave for the office or school and before we go to bed at night. My husband and I made a vow at our wedding never to go to bed angry. And I have to say, in 15 years, we've only broken that once. And both of us felt so horrible about it that we promised we would never do it again. It was the worst to wake up having unresolved. Even if the issue wasn't resolved, we still would say, listen, we are so angry and it's okay to be so angry. I accept it. But know that no matter what, I still love you in spite of this anger. And we have work to do. But we're about to go to sleep now, so let's both go to sleep with a little bit of peace in our hearts. And then we can pick this up another time. It makes a big difference. It makes an enormous difference on your psyche. You wake up not feeling as heavy. This is one way to mitigate this clinging to bodily life. Another one is to have a conversation with your own physical body. To sit quiet and reflect. If your physical body had a voice, what would your physical body say to you? If your physical body had a voice, what would it say to you? I remember doing this with Dr. Mala Cunningham. She led us through a deep relaxation and she asked us to reflect on this while we were in Yoga Nidra. And I heard my voice saying, just love me the way I am. I'm doing my best. Oh, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried because I realized I was not treating my physical body kindly, with love, with gratitude, with appreciation. I kept putting it down. You're not skinny enough. You're not strong enough. You're like this. You're like that. Why can't you be more like this? Why can't you be more like that? Without being aware of it. That is one manifestation of clinging to bodily life. My body is my body is my body. It is a 43-year-old body. It has seen me through good days. It has seen me through bad days. It has taken me through this life. I appreciate this body. And I am living in this physical body in its present moment, not how my body was before I had kids, not how my body was immediately after it had kids. Let me come into my physical body here and now. And think about your death. Often think about it, because it'll force you to tie up your loose ends. And if all your loose ends are tied up, you are at peace no matter what happens. It doesn't mean you don't grieve. It doesn't mean you aren't sad. But again, you can only control up to a certain point. Okay, so the next one. Sutra 10. In the subtle form, all these obstacles can be destroyed by resolving them back to their primal cause, the ego. So really, the primal cause is this identification that we, in our physical bodies, with our own individual personalities, is the whole world. But the whole world doesn't exist around us. The whole world exists, and then there we are. But in their active state, they can be destroyed by meditation. Yat-da-da-da. There's your key. How do you destroy these kleshas? By meditation. It's easier to control things, more tangible things, more gross things that we can see and touch and feel. And then we can go back into the subtle. But that's the beauty of the practice. You can work with your body and go inwards, or you can start inwards and work outwards, or you can do both. And just imagine how much progress you will make when you do both. This is why you have people that work so hard on their bodies and there is no spiritual progress. Actually, people who are accomplished in their hatha and pranayama practices, many of them get an inflated ego. And this is called a spiritual ego. This is why a lot of people cannot stand to be around yogis, because they are so judgmental. Are you that judgmental yogi? Are you inflated because you are accomplished in your spiritual practice? Something to consider. Because if it is, and you have the spiritual ego, you are in the state of facing these kleshas. You cannot minimize them. However, you can actively destroy them through meditation, through the practice of the 8 limbs of yoga. So the last sutra that we're going to cover today is Sutra 12. The womb of karma, action and reaction, has its root in these obstacles. And the karmas bring experiences in the seen, the present, or in the unseen, future. So if you look at action versus reaction, people have done actions and we have reacted a certain way. And then through conditioning, we learn to act similarly and react similarly. And this is what develops thought patterns. And all of these actions and reactions has a root in the ignorance, the egoism, the attachment, the aversion, and the fear of death. So this is why we are in what is called the cycle of karma. And life situations happen to us to try and help us evolve slowly by slowly by slowly. But a lot of the time it's a self-perpetuating cycle, especially when we are not willing to learn and grow from this cycle of action and reaction. What our spiritual practices are doing, what meditation is doing, what the 8 limbs of yoga is doing, is intercepting the cycle, stopping it. Yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. Nirodha is intercept. Slow it down. This is an automatic pattern. Let's rewire the brain. By rewiring the brain using this entire formula that we have studied, we have the capacity to change our present moment and change our future lives. Something like an archer. You know, an archer with bow and arrow. All the arrows that have already been shot out, you can't do anything about. You cannot bring them back. They are going to land somewhere and the reactions are going to happen. Don't sweat it. However, the arrow that is currently in your bow, by the practice of the 8 limbs of yoga, it gives you the capacity to anchor and aim. And it gives you the capacity to open your perspective and look around and choose your target wisely and then let go. That is how you affect your present moment. And then all the arrows that are in the quiver at the back, that is your future. So the seeds you sow right now will affect the rest of your life. Om Shanti. Thank you so much for allowing me to share the Yoga Sutras with you.